April 8, 1945. Daybreak arrives over the East China Sea, bearing the sort of quiet that comes before a great unveiling. Under the water, 300 feet deep where light fails and the weight overwhelms the unwary, the USS Tirante moves through the fluid blackness. Within her metal hull, the atmosphere is tinged with diesel, perspiration, and recirculated air. 66 sailors inhale like a single entity, their actions harmonized by long training and recent hunting. Commander George Street is at the periscope, his gaze fixed to the rubber eyepiece, observing the dim forms of morning solidify into a reality the Imperial Japanese Navy would quickly regret had not stayed a bad dream. She was designated a fleet submarine, yet to the sailors who operated her, the Tirante was destined to be different. A wraith, a specter, an unbelievable entity that shattered every belief the Japanese leadership had regarding U.S. submarine strategy. Before the sun would go down 4 days hence, she would redefine the rules of submarine engagement and consign 5 Japanese warships to the seabed. The Japanese were unable to comprehend the events. Their own naval commanders, examining the after-action summaries, first marked them as mistakes, fabrications, or falsehoods from terrified sailors. The U.S. Navy itself, getting Street's patrol summary weeks afterward, reviewed it twice, then a third time, finding it hard to believe one boat achieved what normally took a whole squadron. Yet before we grasp the unbelievable, we must grasp what Japan anticipated from this undersea conflict. By April 1945, Japan's Imperial Navy had battled U.S. submarines for almost 4 years. They had established procedures, defensive measures, and a self-assured grasp of how these encounters played out. American submarines were powerful, certainly, but they were also predictable. They struck at supply convoys. They set up along established maritime routes. They launched torpedoes from afar, then submerged deep and fled. Their danger mirrored that of a marksman. Deadly while hidden, yet at their core prudent. At their core fearful of open conflict with vessels built for their destruction. Japanese destroyer teams drilled exhaustively in anti-submarine tactics. Their ships were equipped with depth charges, sonar gear, and sufficient velocity to chase any underwater target. The guiding principle was simple. Should a submarine expose itself, you pursued it relentlessly. The destroyer invariably prevailed in these fights, as it dominated the surface, the pace, and the offensive. A submarine that delayed was a submarine that perished. This was not conjecture. This was knowledge paid for by U.S. boats that had remained too long, pressed their luck, and currently lay in the black abysses of the Pacific with their sailors. Commander George Street was aware of this past. All submarine captains were. The USS Wahoo was lost in 1943. The Tang, among the war's most accomplished submarines, was sunk in October 1944, felled by its own defective torpedo. The Albacore, the Growler, the Corvina, the roster of vanished boats expanded monthly. Undersea combat was arithmetic inscribed in blood. Determine the solution. Launch the torpedo. Go deep, go quiet, endure. Do not fight several warships. Do not surface in enemy territory. Do not, for any reason, rush straight toward a destroyer. Street knew these regulations. Then he concluded they were irrelevant. The Tirante had departed Pearl Harbor on March 3, 1945, for her 3rd combat tour. She held 24 torpedoes, a normal capacity. Her men were seasoned but not extraordinary, capable but not godlike. What they had, rather, was a captain who viewed the sea in a new light. Street had reviewed all accessible patrol summaries, internalized every insight from each sunken boat. He grasped that the Japanese anticipated U.S. submarines would act in a specific manner, and he grasped that assumptions were strategic weaknesses ready for exploitation. On April 8th, as daybreak lit the East China Sea, Street's periscope observer sighted them. A convoy with 3 freighters, protected by 2 destroyers. Typical arrangement, typical protocol. The destroyers set themselves up as buffers, compelling any assaulting submarine to reveal itself for a counteroffensive. This was a layout born of experience, perfected by need. It was supposed to be unbreakable. Street observed the layout for 17 minutes. His second-in-command was next to him, expectant. The control room team monitored their gauges, poised for action. In a normal encounter, this was when you'd find the most secure torpedo firing angle, launch from the farthest possible distance, then submerge and flee. The destroyers would react, hunt, and release depth charges, but you would be absent, vanishing into the sea, swapping certainty for endurance. Street called for battle stations. Then he did what the destroyer captains never foresaw. He assaulted them, not the freighters. Not the exposed, lumbering merchant ships that submarines pursued like predators thinning a flock. He aimed for the warships directly. The Tirante launched 6 torpedoes in quick sequence, 3 for each destroyer. From this proximity, at these bearings, the calculations were harsh and precise. The lead destroyer, a Natsushio-class escort, lacked the time to pivot. 3 torpedoes hit her port beam inside 14 seconds. She did not go down. She detonated. The blast was so powerful that the crew on the Tirante sensed it through 300 feet of ocean and their thick metal hull, a jarring concussion that felt like it originated within their bodies. The other destroyer attempted to flee. Its commander, seeing his companion ship come apart, made the smart tactical choice to accelerate and evade. But Street had predicted this. The Tirante's other torpedoes struck her, mid-ship, just as she pivoted. She split in two, her front and rear segments lifting angularly before vanishing under the waves in under 4 minutes. The merchant ships dispersed. Street ignored them. He was not pursuing cargo ships this day. For the Japanese Navy, getting summaries of this battle, the first reaction was incredulity. A submarine sank 2 destroyers? In open combat? Unbelievable. Submarines did not act this way. The summaries must be inflated, incorrect, maybe the effect of mines or airstrikes, wrongly credited to a submarine. Destroyer commanders did not fall to submarines in direct confrontations. It broke the basic arithmetic of sea combat. Street was indifferent to their skepticism. He was on the hunt. April 9th, 28 hours passed. The Tirante had moved to another shipping lane, now nearer the Korean coastline, where Japanese ships stayed close to shore, looking for safety from the lethal zones of the open sea. Reports indicated destroyer patrols were nearby. Street brought the Tirante up, cruising at periscope level in seas so confined that normal submarine procedure deemed them deadly. At 14:30 hours, they located their target. 1 destroyer on duty, weaving as per anti-submarine guidelines. Its captain was performing flawlessly. He altered his velocity, shifted course erratically, and maintained active sonar. He became hard to aim at, hard to anticipate. It ought to have sufficed. Street followed him for 2 hours, holding fire, just watching. He was absorbing this captain's cadence, the faint designs that even chaotic motion finally exposes. People make patterns. It is innate, inescapable. We believe we are acting randomly, yet we are truly rotating through sets of variations, reverting to familiar options, erecting unseen frameworks, even amidst disorder. At 16:27 hours, Street identified the sequence. The destroyer's erratic path exposed her side for precisely 42 seconds on each third pivot. It was brief, but it was sufficient. 3 torpedoes. The destroyer's commander likely never grasped the situation. One instant, his ship was performing normal evasive actions in confined seas where submarines were ineffective. The next, his vessel was failing under him. 3 huge breaches ripped in her hull beneath the waterline. She went down in 8 minutes, carrying most of her sailors. The survivors, just a few dozen men who got into the sea, would afterward claim they never glimpsed the submarine, never sensed its advance, never received any alert that death stalked them via calculation and persistence. 3 destroyers in 36 hours. The Imperial Japanese Navy started to take notice. April 11th. Street guided the Tirante north toward the entryways of Quelpart Island, a key location where Japanese sea movement converged. This was no longer chance-based hunting. This was Street intentionally placing himself in seas where Japanese destroyers functioned with backup, with aviation support, with all strategic advantages. He was confronting them on their home ground. The sailors grasped the implication. Submarine missions relied on area, space to turn, depth to submerge, and range to escape. Confined seas removed these benefits. If a Japanese patrol located them here, flight would be significantly harder. A few sailors later confessed they believed their captain was now fixated, had gone from assertive to self-destructive. They located two destroyers working in concert, a hunter-killer team expressly designed for anti-submarine combat. These were not convoy guards. These were submarine chasers with seasoned sailors, improved sonar, and the battle plan to follow targets until they secured kills. They were likely searching for the Tirante, reacting to the unbelievable summaries of a submarine that slew destroyers. Street observed them search for him. He allowed them to look, to send their active sonar pings through vacant seas, to expend time and fuel chasing a phantom that remained just outside their sensor range. He was studying their search procedures, their teamwork, their communication cadences. And then, once he grasped their hunting method, he revealed how prey appeared from the opposite perspective. The assault occurred at dusk, that transitional time when ships on the surface lose clear sight, but submarines get an edge. The Tirante emerged, truly emerged, under 4,000 yards from the closest destroyer. When surfaced, a submarine's diesel engines provided velocity and agility that underwater electric motors could not equal. It was incredibly hazardous. It was strategically mad. It was precisely what no Japanese destroyer commander anticipated. Street launched 4 torpedoes while surfaced, then plunged the submarine in an emergency dive that strained all systems to their maximum. The torpedoes sped straight and accurate. The first destroyer sustained 2 impacts and overturned in under 6 minutes. The second destroyer, grasping the situation, pivoted toward the Tirante's last seen location at full velocity, its sailors readying depth charges, its commander at last aware he was not chasing a wary American submarine. He was battling an entity that declined to adhere to the plan, but the Tirante had already vanished, submerging deep, sliding below a thermal boundary that deflected sonar beams, much like light refracting in water. Street descended to 400 feet, beyond her official test limit, into forces that caused the hull to strain and the sailors to plead. Overhead, they detected the destroyer looping, hunting, its sonar pulses striking futilely against sea conditions that rendered it sightless. The Japanese commander committed the lethal error of presuming the submarine would flee. He placed his ship between the Tirante's last sighting and the open sea, obstructing what he thought was the getaway path. Street allowed him to think it. Then he raised the Tirante gradually, cautiously, ascending right under the destroyer as if a phantom rising from Hades. At 300 feet, Street launched his final 2 torpedoes nearly vertically. The angles were horrifying, the firing calculation not part of submarine training. Yet at this proximity, with this bearing, the arithmetic turned basic. The torpedoes journeyed up through 300 feet of sea in 18 seconds and hit the destroyer's spine, the single hull section without armor, as none armored for assaults from straight beneath. The destroyer disintegrated, not foundered, disintegrated. Her spine fractured, her framework failed, and she bent in half like a closing book. She vanished in under 2 minutes. 5 destroyers, 4 days. When Commander Street brought the Tirante back to Pearl Harbor on May 5, 1945, his patrol summary rested on Admiral Lockwood's desk like a work of fantasy. Lockwood, head of Pacific Submarine Forces, had reviewed thousands of patrol summaries. He understood submarine capabilities, their restrictions, and the limits of the achievable. This summary breached those limits. He summoned Street himself, not for praise, but to confirm, to comprehend, to pose the query that all in the submarine branch were wondering: how? Street's reply was basic. I ceased engaging in the manner they anticipated. The Japanese formulated their anti-submarine strategy founded on prior American submarine actions. They constructed a whole defensive network centered on presumptions of submarine conduct. Street grasped that these presumptions were a prison, and this prison was barred from within. The Japanese were not only battling American submarines, they were battling their own preconceptions. Street merely demonstrated the result when the foe declined to comply with one's own conceptual framework of the conflict. Yet there was another thing more profound, which Japanese survivors from these battles mentioned when questioned following the war. They depicted a submarine that appeared to possess endless torpedoes, which assaulted with a self-assurance implying limitless supplies, limitless support, and limitless conviction in its own survival. One survivor stated the American submarine battled as if it were invulnerable, as if it was certain mortality could not affect it. This was false, naturally. The Tirante held 24 torpedoes, a normal capacity. She was as exposed to depth charges as all other submarines. Her hull was susceptible to pressure crushing or explosive tearing, identical to every other metal cylinder that braved the deep. Yet Street battled as though these restrictions were non-existent, and by battling in that fashion, he rendered them inconsequential. This was the true fabrication the Japanese could not comprehend. It was not the strategy, not the equipment, it was the mentality. U.S. submarine captains functioned with an assurance stemming from manufacturing confidence. If the Tirante used all her torpedoes, Pearl Harbor would make more. If she incurred damage, docks would mend her. If she vanished, different submarines would proceed with the objective. The American submarine fleet battled knowing that supporting them were plants, dockyards, training centers, and a financial structure able to substitute any loss and endure any setback. The Japanese destroyer teams battled aware that each vessel sunk was non-recoverable. Each seasoned sailor lost created a void that was unfillable. Each torpedo used was one fewer in a shrinking supply. They battled cautiously because it was necessary. Street battled bravely because it was possible. Commander George Street was awarded the Medal of Honor for this tour. The commendation expressly noted his exceptional bravery and motivating command. However, the true commendation, the one submarine captains analyzed for the duration of the conflict, lay within the strategy itself. Street had demonstrated that assertive moves, correctly implemented, were in fact more secure than prudent, normal methods. He had revealed that the optimal protection from a destroyer was not fleeing. It was destroying it beforehand. The Tirante finished 5 combat tours. She endured the conflict, as did Commander Street, as did nearly her entire crew. The 5 destroyers lie on the floor of the East China Sea, their precise location yet undetermined. Their sailors remain encased in metal caskets that will not rise. 66 men in a metal cylinder under the sea destroyed 5 warships built expressly to destroy submarines. The Japanese labeled it unbelievable. The American Navy labeled it exceptional. Commander Street labeled it arithmetic. The dispassionate computation of bearings, velocities, levels, and a single abstract factor the Japanese could not equal. The total certainty derived from the knowledge that backing you is a country with the determination and the means to prevail, regardless of the price, regardless of the duration, regardless of the loss. The ocean holds its mysteries. Yet, at times, those mysteries emerge in paperwork, summaries, and awards for commendations. The Tirante was not ever labeled a phantom in any official capacity. Yet, in the archives of the Imperial Japanese Navy, in the summaries submitted by surviving destroyer commanders, in the bad dreams of Japanese sailors who endured meetings with her, she became precisely that. A spectral ship that broke every regulation, every anticipation, every safe presumption regarding how this undersea conflict was meant to function. Liberty, it appears, battles with different arithmetic than despotism. One battles with prudence derived from shortage. The other battles with audacity derived from plenty. And during those 4 days in April 1945, the gap between those formulas was quantified by 5 destroyers descending into blackness, their sailors never grasping what ideology had slain them as certainly as the torpedoes that ripped through their hulls.